Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Luber, and I'm the Director of Career and Business Engagement with the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. Thank you and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Ask Your Career Coach, Is Graduate School Right for Me? So if you're here for this topic, you're in the right place, and we'll get started. So as always, we like to thank our members and donors of the Alumni Association for powering our webinar series. Thank you so much for your support. And to learn more about membership, feel free to go to our website, umn.alumni.org/membership. All right, if you're here today to learn about is graduate school right for me, and maybe you've made the decision to actually apply to graduate school, you might be interested in receiving additional support by registering for our masterclass, Applying to Graduate School, and that deadline is September 17th. As you can see here, we also have a number of other webinars coming up, such as our masterclass on job search strategies and our masterclass on LinkedIn. And these masterclasses are open to all alumni and friends of the Alumni Association. Alrighty, some of you may be familiar with our U of M Day of Service. To learn more about that, you may go to our website listed on your screen. I'll also share information about these opportunities by email, along with the recording of this webinar to all those who've registered today. And if you'd like to listen in by phone instead, you can dial the number on your screen that you see here, and that's another great option. For today's webinar, you may ask questions at any time, but we'll reserve the last 20 minutes or so for Q&A from audience members. And for those Q&A questions that you may have, you may drop them into our Q&A box that you see on your screen. All right, so without further ado, I'll begin introducing our panelists. Our first panelist is Dan Cheng. Dan Cheng is the Associate Director of Recruitment and Admissions with the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota. Dan is also an alum of the University of Minnesota Carlson School of Management, where he completed his BSB in Marketing and Entrepreneurial Management. Upon graduation, he began working with the Undergraduate Office of Admissions, where he counseled and recruited historically underrepresented students to the University of Minnesota. Dan has also worked at the University of Minnesota's Law School and the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, as well as outside the university, briefly at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. In February 2020, Dan returned to the University of Minnesota and is currently the Associate Director of Recruitment and Admissions for the School of Public Health. Next, I'd like to introduce Kristen Murphy. Kristen Murphy is a career counselor and instructor who works with students in the College of Biological Sciences who are pursuing a variety of careers in advanced education and healthcare careers, the life sciences, and others. She has worked in career development for over 7 years and has worked with students and adults in a variety of fields, including business and education. Previous to her work in career development, Kristen held careers in public health, research, and nonprofit administration. Thank you and welcome, Kristen. Next, we have Erin Reichelt. Erin Reichelt is a senior career counselor and pre-law advisor in the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Minnesota. She has been in this role for 8 years and has over 10 years of experience in higher education. As an alum of the journalism school at the University of Minnesota, she started her career in advertising prior to deciding to go to graduate school and pursue a career shift. She currently works with students and alums who are applying to law school, as well as other graduate school programs. Erin also serves on the board of Midwest Association of Pre-Law Advisors. Thank you and welcome, Erin. Next, we have James Rowan. James Rowan is the Assistant Director of Admissions and Senior Admissions Officer at the Graduate School of Admissions at the University of Minnesota. James has over 30 years of experience working in admissions and has special expertise with international student admissions. His work has taken him on journeys around the world to places such as China, Turkey, Germany, Russia, and across the United States. Jim is a lifelong resident of Minnesota and has earned a BA and master's degree from the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much, James, for being with us. All right, so before we get started, I like to propose a poll to our audience members. And so why might you apply to graduate school? So I'm curious to know about your reasoning for applying to graduate school at this current moment. And so I'm going to pop up our poll. So let me get that for us. And now you should be able to see the poll on your screen. And so how would you describe your reason to apply to graduate school? So we have to land a job, to advance in my field, for the sake of knowledge, Not quite sure. All right. So it looks like we have about 76% of, or 80% of folks who voted so far. So I'll just end our poll and reveal the results. All right, so as you can see here, many folks, about 90% of those who respond to the survey said that they would pursue, the reason for pursuing graduate school would be to advance in their field, and others are considering it for the sake of knowledge, to kind of build upon the knowledge they currently have. All right, let me stop the poll. Excellent. So moving forward, we'll move on to our first question for our panelists. So I'm curious to know, tell us a little bit more about what graduate programs are in general. So what kind of programs are generally available? And I'll let James take the lead on this question. And yeah, thank you.
Sure, thanks, Rebecca. You know, those of us that are in this state sometimes forget to remind ourselves how lucky we are to have a place like the University of Minnesota right here. We are truly a comprehensive institution, and we've got representatives from some of the different programs here. But if you think about it, right here at this Twin Cities campus, we have liberal arts represented, engineering, science, medical, business, law, all kinds of different opportunities that are available for students. And just to back up a little bit, comparing graduate education to your undergraduate education, where a typical bachelor's degree is going to be 4 years in length, and it's fairly structured. You know what to expect, minimum of 120 credits to graduate, requirements that you need to complete, such as perhaps what we have here, the liberal education requirements. At the graduate level, it's going to be set up quite a bit differently, and you will find a variation of master's and doctoral and professional degrees that vary in the length of study time, different within different fields. So you really do have to do a little research on your program to find out how it works in that field. A typical master's degree is going to be 2 years in length. You know, if you think about a full-time undergraduate student, you would take a minimum of 12 or 13 credits per semester. At the grad level, it's about half that. Typically, well, 6 credits would be considered full-time for a standard graduate program. And it really is a specialization within your field. You are not going to be taking a lot of things from outside of your major field of study. When we describe a master's degree, you're still learning about your field of study. You're still taking knowledge in. Very often there'll be some type of a big project that you do in your master's program, perhaps a thesis that you do, that you'll have to defend your thesis, some type of comprehensive examination that you complete. And as I say, usually about 2 years, although there are some programs that are accelerated to 1 year. Doctoral degrees, 4 to 6 years in length. I think the average time that we see is about 5.5 years. And this is where we describe more that you're giving knowledge back, contributing to that body of research in your field of study. Typically, you're going to have a written and oral exam, a dissertation, a big project that you are putting really years of time building your dissertation and then publicly defending your dissertation. Professional degrees, these will often be specific skills and training that you're learning, hands-on work, sometimes longer than the research degrees. The funding for professional degrees is really different than the structure you'll see for the research degrees. Post-baccalaureate certificates, those are typically 1 year, not in every field of study. And maybe it's something that you do along with a master's degree or a standalone certificate. And just to give you an example, if you start looking at the different graduate programs, you'll see that some programs will offer both the master's and the PhD. Others, you don't have a doctoral option, just the master's degree. And then there's some PhD programs that will not have the master's option as something that you can apply for. So you'll find just about every shape and size of these graduate programs available.
Great, that was all great information. I really like the breakdown of the different degree options and opportunities. And we'll move on to our next question, and I'll have all the panelists put on their put on their cameras now and come into the room a little bit to maybe begin answering some of the other questions we have here too. And if there's anything you want to add to the last question, you're welcome to do so as well. So our next question is, what are some of the qualities of a strong applicant? So how would you describe some of those qualities of a strong applicant? A reference slide, but I'll kind of let you all kind of talk a little bit more from your own perspective.
Maybe just to get started, I think I bet everyone on this panel would agree that the word that you hear most frequently describing admission at the graduate level is it's a holistic review. It's an overall review. And having been around here a while, I can tell you that one of the bigger changes that has taken place in graduate education is, in the past, it was about GPA and GRE scores. Standardized tests were very important for the admission process. That has probably been one of the bigger changes we've seen, especially during this pandemic time, where we're seeing a lot of programs that have either suspended things like the GRE requirement, or at least, or perhaps done away with it altogether. And then it becomes a matter of looking at the overall qualities in a holistic way of past education experience, recommendations, personal statements that students write. I'm talking a lot here. I'll let the other panelists have a chance to chime in.
Sure.
Well,
yeah, I can chime. Oh, do you want? You can start, Kristen. Go ahead.
I was just going to echo what James had said. And in my role, I work with many students who are interested in health professional school after graduation. And with health professional school in particular, those admissions committees are really, like James said, looking at the whole person. So academic metrics are certainly part of it, but then the other aspects that you demonstrate through some of your experiences. And experiences don't just have to be work experiences. It can be things like volunteerism and service to your community and leadership and that sort of thing.
And that's really something that I was also going to say. So I as my bio indicated, primarily work with individuals that are applying to law school. And the credentials, the numbers do definitely matter quite a bit with admission to a law school. But the recommendations that you get from professors or supervisors, the experiences that you've had in and out of the classroom and in a workplace setting. A lot of people that go to law school have quite a bit of professional experience too. Outside of undergrad, the majority are not coming straight from undergrad. So really just thinking about what you would add to a community of a law school too. So that seems like some of the qualities of a strong applicant.
To add on to all of the things that have been said, as well as just going back to what Kristen said too, in terms of experience, a lot of our graduate programs, at least the ones that I've worked at, do not necessarily have a prerequisite degree plan. So, we have, when I was working at the law school or in public affairs and at public health, we have students that come from all kinds of academic backgrounds. So you may be thinking, oh, I'm interested in public health, but I have a theater background. Well, we have students that have gone into public health with theater backgrounds, or thinking about nutrition, or just any other areas of undergraduate study that they might have. One of the key things that we look for on the admission side is that commitment to the future work that you're going to do. So what have you done that has shown that you're dedicated, or that you've done your research into this profession, and that this is something that's right for you? So a lot of students find connections. So like I said, we've had students that had theater backgrounds that have gone into toxicology because they found a link between the two. A lot of it was working with, for that individual person, was working with stage work and thinking about the environment that they are working in, and understanding the chemicals in stage paint, and building materials and things like that, and understanding what's kind of floating around in the air that they're working in. So there's a lot of connections that people can find through their previous work. So don't feel that just because if you don't have a STEM background, you can't go into public health, for instance. There might be other prerequisite coursework that you might need to fill in some of the gaps, and the schools can inform you about what those are so that you can be a strong applicant when it does become time to apply as well. And if I could add something to the previous question too, in terms of the certificate or the degree options, I encourage students to check with the profession in which they are looking to pursue, because sometimes you might see a predominance of one degree, but there might be other options to still get to the same path. And so speaking from, again, my law school background as well, a lot of people want to go into policy and going into government, and just because they see a lot of people that have law degrees, there might be Masters of Public Policy, Masters of Public Affairs that might also get them to the places that they want to, and it'd be less schooling, so maybe 2 years instead of 3 years, less cost. But there are qualities of a law degree that can also prepare them for other areas in government. So there's not always necessarily one path to get to the same end goal, is what I like to say. For us at School of Public Health, for instance, with biostatistics, we have both a Masters of Public Health and a Masters of Science, as well as a PhD track. And so for us, we find more students go in the Masters of Science program than the Masters of Public Health, just because the Masters of Science is more common in the field, but we offer both options. So you just want to do some homework and research on what's the best path for you in terms of degree offerings.
Sounds like there's a lot of information to kind of shift through and understand in terms of the different types of programs and opportunities, and also how to evaluate your own candidacy. But at the same time, it does sound like there isn't quite a perfect checklist. And I think that's kind of like what many of you are getting at, thinking about when they talk about the holistic applicant, thinking about all the different qualities and experiences that you've had to make you a well-rounded candidate. So thank you so much for talking about those points. I do have sort of this one reference slide. Oh, let's see if it's going to work. Okay, there's multiple clicks here. Surprise. So these are some of the considerations that the programs consider. And looks like these look a little bit even weighted. When I look at GPA and other languages and things like that. Could you speak a little bit to this slide a little bit more?
Sure. Sometimes when you look at websites for different graduate programs, they'll have a statement on there that we are candidates should have a 3.0 or higher GPA. They may or may not say something like that, but really it does vary quite a bit. You will find some grad programs that 3.0 might not be realistic. Students that are admitted often will have higher GPAs, and then you'll see programs that will often admit students with below 3.0 if they have other things going for them, such as great professional experience and background in that field of study. But it is something that admissions committees will look for, that students have consistently tried to improve themselves through coursework they've taken or through the work experience that they get to be a better fit for that graduate program. If you've done research or have independent study experiences, it may be a good idea to highlight those things with your application, honors programs that you've had, and as we've mentioned here a few times, certainly professional experience. If you're just trying to test the waters a little bit and can take a grad level course, perhaps as like a non-degree student, there's a few things that can do for you. First off, it'll give you a sense on what is it like to take this graduate coursework, but also introduce you to some of your fellow graduate students and perhaps a faculty member that could end up being a mentor, maybe someone that would write a letter of recommendation for you. So that's a good way to get a little bit of experience as you're maybe just testing the waters.
Thank you, that's a great point. Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. If you want to add more to this slide, you may do so in the next question as well. All right, so the next question brings us to, do I need a graduate degree to advance in my career? And how can I find out versus like just wanting to pursue an advanced degree for the sake of knowledge? So yeah, speak to the need or desire to pursue a graduate degree in order to advance within one's career.
I can take a stab at this one first.
Yeah.
You know, it really depends. I think that's the answer a lot of time. It depends. So if you're someone who wants to enter a brand new field that requires specialized knowledge, for example, engineering or possibly a field of business, and you don't have any of the required coursework, like an earlier undergraduate degree in that area, and you don't have any of the skills that are required, then it may make sense to have an advanced degree, such as an MBA or a Master of Science degree in engineering for that kind of specialized knowledge. So it really depends. It's occasionally helpful to have a master's degree or a PhD. It really depends on the field. And I think one of the best ways to find out is to speak with people who are in the profession that you're interested in and to really ask them questions, not only about the nature of the work, but to get a feel for what kinds of graduate programs or even the certificates which might be helpful, in that role, and how they went about deciding on a graduate program, whether graduate program is necessary, and what types of graduate programs.
Great, thank
And
you.
I'll jump in on this too, because there's certainly a lot of graduate programs or a lot of professions, that just straight up require some level of degree or licensure or something like that. So that's something that even looking at job postings for careers that you might be interested in to see what type of requirements there are on those, you may see something in the preferred requirements, but for example, to be a lawyer, you need to have gone to law school. There's not really any way around that. However, to work in the legal field, you don't always need to have gone to law school. To work in government, to work in policy, for example, there are a lot of different requirements there. So it really does depend on the field. And I totally echo what Kristen said, that the best way is to talk to people that are in your field to really determine what's the right path for you and in your career with your next steps. What does that look like for you?
Thank you so much. Dan, James, did you want to add anything to that part of the conversation?
I think I would echo everything that was already said, but to give an example too in terms of advancement, again, pulling at my experience at other areas at the University of Minnesota. For instance, the Humphrey School of Public Affairs offered a certificate in human services, and in one of the organizations that they worked with, that organization made it a requirement that if anybody wants to advance beyond a certain level in that organization or that company, that they are to do that certificate, or they would need to have that certificate in order to do that. So, it can also vary within the industry, within a company, in terms of what they feel is necessary for students or for their employees and professionals to advance. So sometimes it may not be an industry-wide thing, but it may be specific to an organization. So just again, do your informational interviews and find out what others are doing and what's common in that field.
All right. So kind of building off that question, what are some of the differences in applying to graduate school versus applying for a job? And yeah, so speak a little bit more about that, and then I'll lead you into some other questions.
I can start again here. So there are a lot of similarities. There are quite a few differences. I think one of the biggest differences when applying to graduate schools is the length of time required to research programs. So it can take a while to figure out what kinds of schools you might want to apply to. Some graduate programs will ask for a resume or a CV for admission. There's occasionally a interview as part of the graduate admissions process, but not always. So that's a bit of a difference between looking for a job and applying for a job versus applying for graduate school, where for a job, there's almost always, without exception, an interview process and a resume. So those are some of the key differences, I think. But in terms of similarities, you still want to research, going into the job market and understanding what kinds of careers might be a fit. And you'd also want to research graduate programs and understand how you might fit there as well.
Great.
I would just add that with some of the research programs, when you're applying to grad school, it's almost as if you're applying for graduate school and a job at the same time. Very often, along with your admission offer will come an offer for a graduate assistant position or some other type of position within the program where you do end up having a bit of employment along with your graduate studies.
I would say, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just to add in, I think some of it is also mentality, right? So there's kind of just different personal expectations when you're applying to grad school versus applying to a job. And, graduate school is, an investment into yourself, right? Into your continued learning, knowledge, professional skill sets, things like that. But there's also financial implication to it as well. So there's definitely those other things to weigh. The process can be very much similar in terms of graduate school and applying for a job, just like Kristen said, but there's definitely a mentality, a personal mentality that needs to go into it in terms of the things that you consider about when approaching it, how you ask your questions, what questions should you ask, because it's not just, this next advancement in a typical career, but it's setting the stage for maybe sometimes a whole new career. And you don't want to go into it lightly. It's not just the next stepping stone. It's usually a big step for a person's future. So, so really putting that weight in there can really just help in that decision-making process and how you enter into that experience. And also at the same time too, in addition, the similarities is just the professional nature of it. We encourage folks to approach it like you are applying for a job and connect with people for instance, in my position or faculty or program coordinators that you may encounter throughout the journey as if, they're the people you're interviewing with, right? So make sure that when you're communicating clearly. You're not just texting your questions to individuals, because there is room for error and spelling mistakes, and it doesn't show your professionalism in that communication, if that makes sense. So because especially like with PhDs, you're looking for faculty advisors and you're building a relationship with them, and if you're not approaching it in the most professional manner or courteous manner, then they may decide they don't want to work with you just out of those communications. So so do take it seriously, just as you would for a job application.
Erin, did you want to add anything to that? Or I know we had talked. No.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was thinking like we had talked a little bit about kind of the idea of applying to graduate school immediately, after undergrad or without the right mix of experience, particular graduate program versus building some experience in that field. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what that might look like for one's competitiveness?
Yeah, and I think that again, really it depends on the individual always, whether or not you might feel, and I know the audience on this call ranges quite a bit in terms of where you're at in your career, but a lot of people that I am working with are making the choice whether or not to go to a graduate school immediately out of undergrad versus working for a while. And I think it totally depends on the individual in terms of what's right for that person have they really been exposed to why they want to go to this particular graduate program, and they're really feeling certain that that grad program is the right one for them, versus just thinking that they need an advanced degree and kind of going forward with whichever one might seem right without doing all of that research. So I think that if a person has a lot of experience, maybe internships or part-time jobs or research during undergrad, they can be totally ready to go right after undergrad. But if that's not something that fit into your schedule during undergrad, it's totally fine to wait too. And there's no downside to that, really. There's no negative impact in the admission process if you are not coming directly from undergrad. Most graduate programs really value people that come in with, some external perspective and different experiences, and really value that contribution to their community too. So it's really about thinking about what's right for you, and are you the best candidate you can be for that graduate program, or is there something else that you wanted to explore first or get some experience in before you jump in?
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just add on to that, to what you're saying? So I really agree that it's up to the individual and how you know yourself, or how well you know yourself. And what I like to say when I'm talking with my students and alumni is know what's on the other side of that graduate degree. Okay, it's a pretty big investment of your time. It's a big investment of your money. And so you want to know your reasons for going in. And you also ideally want to go to graduate school at a time when you're able to manage your time pretty well, because it can be, in class all the time, day to day. It can be a big investment of that time day to day. So that's just another point that I wanted to make.
Great, those are all excellent points. Moving on to our next question. This is sort of what we just talked about. All right, just kidding, we covered it. All right, next question. Tell us what it might look like for an applicant applying to graduate school during a downturn in the economy.
One thing that we have seen, if you look back at the data of number of applications that come in for graduate education, is when the economy takes a downturn, the applications go up. I think part of that just makes sense, but part of it does point to the value of graduate education for students, that they do see this as a way to maybe get further ahead in their positions by returning to school, getting more training, and going on for that next level degree.
Just to maybe add into there, I think on the school side, with more applications coming in, you do tend to see then more competitiveness for admission. So the process may become more competitive during a downturn in the economy. Then there's also funding implications as well. Students in a downturn economy, have a harder time with being able to fund their education. So they may be admitted to the program, but there'll be more emphasis on the financial aid opportunities, whether or not you get subsidized or unsubsidized support, or there's scholarships from the school. So there's all those kinds of implications that come in. So that is also a reflection of the economy. And also I should say, since I mentioned subsidized versus unsubsidized loans, I mean, the financial opportunities in terms of federal loans are much more limited in graduate programs too. So while a student might have been more eligible for need-based loans, like state or federal grants, subsidized loans, there aren't those kind of opportunities really at the graduate level. But a lot of PhDs, and most PhDs, do tend to be heavily funded as well. So there's that scope to think about. But just wanted to throw that in terms of the economy, that on the school side, it also can be a very challenging time because there's more students, there's more, which means there's more competition for limited spaces, but then there's also limited funding to go around to everybody. And then that also might keep students from actually being able to follow through with their admission.
Mm. You mentioned the word competitiveness and there being a lot of applicants applying all at once. How does one sort of help elevate their application when applying to graduate school to help kind of beat through some of that competitiveness? I guess I'm trying to say, how do they stand out in some ways? I think that's a question I used to get a lot from students. And so I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
When you talk to faculty members who serve on admissions committees, what they'll tell you is, especially with this holistic review process, they are looking right away for students who they can tell have done their homework on that graduate program. Are they a good fit for that student? Is that student a good fit for them? How much do they know about what we do in our program? So, you know, especially if you're applying to multiple institutions and some of them might be specializing in slightly different things within their department, if you can show you really know what they're all about and why it is that getting into that program is a good fit, is what your goal should be.
I think also with the downturn economy piece, with people turning to education instead of looking for jobs, in the application process, we are looking for a genuine interest and a genuine connection, as opposed to this is just something I'm going to do because I can't find a job, right? I think that is something that the admissions committee does become more, does scrutinize more in the application and looking at the personal statement and seeing a genuine interest, because there's been a lot of times in my career, especially during recessions, is that it's clear somebody's just applying because they don't know what else they should do with their time, or they couldn't find a job, and they just put out a personal statement that's very generic and very disconnected from what kind of program they're trying to get into. And so those do usually negatively affect the student's consideration in a competitive applicant pool process, because we're looking for serious students that are not only admissible, but are going to actually stick through the program. Again, pulling back from some of my previous experience with law school, there's a lot of students that just said, you know, I've been curious about the law, you know, I've heard these stories in the news and blah, 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 and now I want to pursue law school. Well, that's great in theory, but then when you get into the first year of your legal education, it is a really tough academic year, and it's grueling. And then what we don't want to do is to bring you into a program that you're not going to be successful and not going to, you know, see all the way throughout to graduation, leave early and have all this debt and no certification and job opportunities. So so it's really important in a competitive application to be able to demonstrate that that commitment or that understanding, and as Jim said, is doing your research.
Thank you. Those are all excellent points. Move on to our next question. I think we have a next question. Okay. How to identify programs available and programs of interest? So how do I narrow down maybe programs of interest, or how do I find out more about different programs?
Well, I can take this one. So one way, I think, which we've talked about here already, is by speaking with other people. So for students who are ready to go into the graduate school process, speaking with other graduate students in programs of interest is a great idea to learn more, not only about the graduate program they went into, but the other graduate programs that they investigated during their own process. And clearly speaking with faculty in departments can be a really great source of information to learn about the different requirements for programs and what, you know, how the program can prepare them for a job if they decide to go into that particular program. So that's one way.
I'll just add that there's a lot of different ways you can get this information, but the graduate school website, cla.umn.edu, has a list of A to Z list of all graduate programs that are available. And, you know, it's if you might not always put together your field of study with the name of that major. So this is a good way to get information and to get started. And plus, there's a link to, there's two key people that you need to get to know within graduate programs usually, especially in the research fields. There's a director of graduate studies and a graduate program coordinator. The director of graduate studies is typically a faculty member. That position may rotate every 3 or 6 years, something like that. Graduate program coordinators are generally staff members, sometimes who have been around a long time. Often will be that person that answers that phone call or email when you contact the department, and they can give you a lot of tips in helping you get more information about that major program. Or I don't know, Rebecca, perhaps you can put that into the chat or to the Q&A, the grad.umn.edu.
Yes, I'll definitely make sure to include it in the follow-up email for all participants. And I believe I have a reference slide at the end that has that listed as well.
And I'll jump in too, because it really depends on the type of program that you're looking into, how you might identify where to research. I mean, I know most health programs and law and a few other like independently accredited programs, you usually can search like on the accrediting body website or on the like the Law School Admission Council has a pretty good, search tool, and there's many others out there too. So it's, it's probably first like what type of program that you're thinking about, and then within that sphere, there's probably some additional ways of researching that are specific to the field that you're interested in. But again, it all comes back to even like talking to people that are in that field. And if you even start with like a admissions office, even if it's not them, they probably can direct you on kind of where to look broadly too. So usually talking to an actual person gets you to the best research tools.
I'll just add in with the School of Public Health, one of the challenging things is there are just so many different program areas. We offer over 20 degrees with different kind of programmatic specialties within just public health, and they're all somewhat in different divisions. And if you were to look across and compare across the industry of public health degree programs, unfortunately there's not like other programs. Unfortunately, in public health, there's not a lot of universal naming conventions and consistency in programs. So while we may have a program in maternal and child health at another institution, you'll have a very similar program, but it's named completely different. So it can be very, very frustrating and very challenging. So, and that's, I'm just speaking for that on the School of Public Health area, is that you do really need to inquire. I really encourage you to do that, because then we could help you figure out, is what you're interested in epidemiology, or is it really biostatistics, or is it environmental infectious diseases, which are all in different areas. They have some overlap, but again, based off of your professional goals, we might steer you into one place or another that would be more beneficial. So definitely utilize the resources at hand. Can't stress that enough, like everybody else has.
Thanks to everyone. Yeah, you brought up some really interesting points, like talking to people, getting to know what the program's about, the different naming conventions, how those can vary from university to university. And I also like to add, even checking out and reading the course descriptions that are required of that particular program to understand the differences between each programs, which would be beneficial as well. Because some programs have additional courses that you might enjoy, or different types of courses that you might enjoy better, even if it has the same name. So definitely take a look at those course descriptions to identify programs of interest, in addition to just looking at the name and degree type. All right, so moving on to our next portion is Q&A from the audience. So if you're listening in right now, you may enter your question into the Q&A box. And it looks like we have a few questions coming in. So I'll look at those and organize those, and then I'll post them to our panelists, but they're also welcome to pick up questions as we see them as well. All right, so one person asks, will a master's degree help with being a strong candidate? If so, how is it considered in the application as a whole? So I'm guessing this person is wanting to apply for maybe a PhD, and they are asking if a master's degree will help them.
Hey, I'll respond to that. I think this really varies quite a bit by department and by major. You'll find PhD programs here at the university that admit students directly from bachelor's degrees into the PhD programs. And to that question too about taking time off between graduate education and your undergraduate degree and graduate education, I would think somebody should do a research project on this, but if you look at the application pool, you'd probably find it's about 50-50. Some students that go directly from undergraduate to graduate, maybe perhaps right into a PhD program. Others that will take a year or two or more years off, maybe earn a master's along the way, and then return later on for a PhD program. So it really does depend on that major, that department, their culture. You could probably get more information by contacting departments directly with that question.
There are also some PhD programs that incorporate the master's with the PhD curriculum. So if you don't have a master's, but they say it is required, they can still potentially admit you into the PhD program with the expectation that you would concurrently take courses that would obtain your master's in that pursuit of the PhD. Those are rare. There's not a ton of those out there, but definitely something to ask a PhD program if they typically require masters is there a route for you to get your master's while you're pursuing the PhD? And I think that was one of the other questions too. If the industry does not have a master's widely available, can you go straight to the PhD? And as Jim said, I think there are programs that allow you to go straight from a bachelor's to a PhD.
Thank you. We also have a question here regarding age, and I think the question is getting at, so the question reads, what is the greatest or oldest age you've seen in graduate programs? So I'm curious to know about, curious to know your thoughts or your answer to that question.
I've had a 78-year-old student in one of our law programs. So just that's the, I don't want to say the oldest, but that's the highest age that I've seen in my career.
Yeah, I've worked with graduate students in the past, and I worked with graduate students in their 40s and maybe more rarely in their 50s. I entered graduate school in my mid-30s and received my degree when I was 40 years old. So I'm someone who changed careers and went to graduate school to be involved in the career that I'm in right now. So I definitely think there's no wrong age. You want to consider, what do you want to get out of this education? What do you want your life to look like? And if graduate education is a value for you, then there's always a good time to do that.
Thank you. So our next question reads, with full time for a master's being around 6 credits, does that allow someone working full-time to take on full-time credit work or a full-time credit load? Or would you suggest a reduced credit load for those working full-time?
I can start with this. I mean, there are so many different graduate programs and different ways of getting a graduate program that I think it's really important to know that if you need to work, there may be a program that can accommodate that depending on, the degree program. I was someone who completed my master's program when I was working full-time as well. And I think I typically did not take a full-time credit load, but I took classes like throughout the year instead to kind of spread it out. But a lot of times even the info page for a specific program would indicate if you would be able to do part-time versus full-time. But I think especially now there's a lot of different ways that you can work and do a graduate program as well.
And I had mentioned this earlier too, but if you do have an opportunity to take a grad level course, perhaps as a non-degree student, you're going to get a sense on the level of intensity within that program. So, everybody's different, but you might, if I'm going to work full time, then I probably want to be a part-time student or vice versa.
Great. So a question here kind of about the application process in some ways. What makes a statement of interest or CV rather stand out and they're applying to a Master's of Public Health program?
Yes, I'll chime in quickly. Personal statement, really, we're looking for a well-written statement. So it should have a beginning, middle, and end. I always say to cut out the fluff and really get to the meat of the information of how you're going to present yourself. A lot of our programs, or most of our programs at our School of Public Health, do not have an interview as part of the application process. So your personal statement really is your voice in the application. So it's kind of your personality that's coming through, your story. What is it that's important to you that you want to make sure that the admissions committee takes notice of? So if it's your connection to the program, if it's your personal background that's led you to why you want to pursue this degree, I think that's the key thing. The bottom line is each school might have a different personal statement prompt. So make sure you're reading those directions, you're following those directions, because some may look similar, but they may ask you, they may be looking for a very specific examples of your connection, or they may even say, talk about a specific public health crisis that's happening. Obviously, we can all pick on a few really easily, but how that relates to you. And so make sure you're following those directions. Even things like word count. So some may say no more than 500 words. So make sure you're sticking to that. That's usually about 2.5 pages double spaced with normal margins. Don't mess with your margins, right? So don't go like little tiny margins and single space just so you can get everything in there, because that is very frustrating to an admissions committee member that's reading thousands of applications. So you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind who your audience is for that statement. And also, as it relates to the CV or the resume, your personal statement should not be a regurgitation of your resume in a narrative form. So it's not, I went to this undergraduate school, I did these programs, and then the next thing was to go on to XYZ and the whole story, because that's really what your resume or your CV should be, is that summary of that experience. So your personal statement can draw upon those things, or maybe one or two of those things, and expand upon it, but should not be a full narrative regurgitation of that. In terms of a resume and CV, it should really be that summary of your experiences, especially that are relevant to the program that you're applying to. So pull out and really highlight the experiences you have that are directly tied to that. If you don't have a ton of that, that's fine as well. But just make sure that you are crafting your resume that's specific to that program. Some programs, like executive programs, may say there shouldn't be really much of a difference between your graduate resume and a work resume, because they are really looking for those experiential pieces. So those are just a few of my tips in terms of personal statement and resume. And if I could give a little plug in, the School of Public Health, we are actually doing a series of short webinars over the lunch hour that address specifically a personal statement, a resume, letters of recommendation. So if you are interested in learning more about what makes a competitive statement from that perspective, if you go to our website, I can put it in the chat. It's got, we're starting to put all those dates up. So where we get more in depth into each of those components.
Yeah, Dan, definitely send those to me. I'll send those out to everyone who's registered for today's webinar and get that information out to everyone.
Thank you.
We have maybe time for maybe one more question, and I think this is a good question here. Will a low GPA, they put a i.e. 2.8 to 2.9, but a couple years of experience in the field automatically reject my application? Should one try to increase their GPA through a post-bac program before applying to graduate school? And I think there's a lot, it depends in this, but I'm curious to know what you have to say. And we didn't even talk about post-bac, so.
Right. Yeah, so I think that absolutely not. A lower GPA, I don't think would automatically disqualify you for admission to a graduate program. Those years of experience, depending on what you're doing, could really count for quite a bit. I feel like a great way to kind of assess where you might stand in terms of being admitted to a graduate program is a little bit about what we've talked about already. So looking at the graduate programs of interest, and typically graduate programs will have outcomes information or information about applicants who are admitted to a program and their admission statistics. So a range of GPAs that they've accepted, standardized test scores, if that's a requirement, they may have an average there and also a range. If that's not there, if you can't find that very easily on a website or an online search, then certainly reaching out to the graduate programs to learn a little bit more about that information can help you understand that it really is usually more of a holistic process for admitting students to graduate programs. A post-bac can be an option for some people, and you know, you may be able to increase your GPA in a post-bac or you know, show evidence of academic potential in a post-bac program. You also maybe have the advantage of being connected to alumni at a different university or a different program, which can be helpful when you're thinking about networking for a job or a new career. So that could be one advantage of a post-bac as well. But then I would also caution you to think about, what will I do with my post-bac, or can I use this post-bac in a career if I am not, you know, later on admitted to professional school or the master's or PhD program that I am hoping for.
I guess I'll add a little something to this conversation. And I know James mentioned this earlier about, you know, talking with the graduate school programs about your candidacy and how to improve your candidacy. And one of those potential ways you could potentially do that is through taking 1 or 2 classes as a non-degree seeking student to kind of prove or show evidence of academic success. But that's something that you would have to discuss with that program of interest to see how that would be evaluated in the application process and if that's an opportunity available to you. All right, so it looks like we have 2 minutes left, and I want to get to this next question. I feel so torn, but I'll try to I'll send more information to everyone about the questions we answered as well. And I just want to thank our panelists today for your time. Thank you, James, Kristen, and Dan, and Erin, for your time today. Thank you to our audience members for being present. I will send the recording to everyone who registered for today's webinar with information about some of the resources we discussed and some of the slides as well. All right, so thank you so much for your time and have a great rest of your afternoon. Goodbye.